This is Tommy's Outdoors 45, and this episode is about stand-up paddleboarding. Yes, folks, it was only a matter of time before we have an episode about stand-up paddleboarding. My guest and your guest today is Oona Tibbetts from Wild SUP Tours. And we talk in a podcast about stand-up paddleboarding, well, obviously, and how to start and some technical details. But we also talk about Oona's expedition to stand-up paddleboard the length of Wild Atlantic Way. So for those of you who don't know what Wild Atlantic Way is, Wild Atlantic Way is the longest coastal route in the world. And Oona is stand-up paddleboarding the length of the coast along the route. So that's not a small feat. It's a lot of stand-up paddleboarding. So folks, without any further ado, please welcome Oona Tibbetts.
Hello, Tommy.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah.
With us today, Oona Tibbetts from Wild SUP Tours or Wild SUP Tours.
Yep. That's the one.
So you're going to tell us in a second what that is, what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, we're going to move into some challenge, I suppose, or some... How do you call it? What you're doing now? It's event. No,
an expedition.
Expedition.
I suppose.
It's a good one. It's a good one. Okay, listen. So tell our listeners what Wild SUP Tours are and everything about it.
All that jazz. So Wild SUP Tours is a stand-up paddleboard tour company based in Dingle, but we operate in different areas of County Kerry. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that we take people out into the water using the stand-up boards and just kind of explore and get a chance to like be in nature and sort of just experience it. Because there's something wonderful about the stand-up boards where you're standing there. There's nothing in between you and everything else. Like even in a kayak, there's still the boat around you. Mm-hmm. On the paddleboard, it's just this sort of thin layer and you fall into the water easily and you jump off.
I presume that's an advantage of it. So you fall into the water easily. It's good.
It's good. And it's also easy to get back on it again. Mm-hmm. And so like a big part of our tours, especially with the teenagers and stuff we take out, is just pure messing. Like people just jumping around, you know, having a laugh, basically.
Okay.
But yeah, we take people out. We've got short tours, long tours. We do camping trips down in Kenmare Bay. Mm-hmm. They're probably my personal favorite of our offerings. And it's just totally unplugging for like a long weekend. You're there, you're in this beautiful place. You're paddling on the water, you're eating campfire food, and
wow.
That's pretty special.
That's great. That's great. And you know what? We'll get into the stand-up paddleboarding later on and dive into technical details about it, right? We can talk about it. But I'm much more interested right now and you know, I would kind of like to start the podcast with talking about your initiative or your expedition. So you're stand-up paddleboarding, I guess.
Yeah.
Wild Atlantic Way.
Exactly.
Just to raise the awareness of the problems we have in the environment, and I'm not gonna be explaining that. I'm gonna leave it to you. So you explain it.
Okay, so what I'm doing, like you said, I'm stand-up paddleboarding the Wild Atlantic Way. So from Kinsale in Cork, right around to Muff in Donegal, and then it's another like 6 kilometers into Derry. So I figure I'll paddle all the way to Derry, you know, make a day of it.
Yeah.
And I'll be following the coastline, kind of all the ins and outs. And so it ends up being something like 2,000 plus kilometers of coastline I'll cover.
Wow.
And I'm doing it to raise awareness, environmental awareness. But my angle is like I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert on climate change or anything. But it's about beauty and kind of appreciation. So you're not going to kind of care for anything if you don't care about it.
Yes.
So I want to help people care more about the planet, I suppose.
That's a very good point. That this is where it starts. That someone needs to appreciate the beauty and nature first before starts caring about conserving it. Because if you don't care, you probably don't care all the way.
That's kind of where I was going, and I was looking at all the articles about climate change and the dead we're looking at, and the facts and the figures and the photos of plastic and all the scary stuff. Anyway, I was looking at all that, and I felt kind of frozen, like wanting to do something but not having any idea what or how, or if I'd have any impact, or if any of it mattered anyway. And so I was having a pint with a friend, and we were talking about all this, and I was interested in doing the paddle at that point. And we started talking about beauty, really, and kind of exploring. And the Wild Atlantic Way is kind of a perfect place to do it because it is so rugged and natural and awesome, like in the true sense of the word, awesome.
Yeah, the coastline, Irish coastline is just awesome.
Yeah, it's spectacular. It's a pretty phenomenal one. So it seems like a great place to show off the natural beauty we have on the planet, and just using this coastline as an example of what is here and why it's worth preserving.
Yeah, so people can kind of follow you and just see follow you on social media, obviously, and see the pictures and see everything and kind of get it. And do you see a lot of on your paddles? Do you see a lot of this problems like plastic pollution or anything like that?
I've definitely seen a good bit paddling along in the middle of nowhere, and like this bottle cap floats by, and it's like, turn around, grab it. So I definitely have seen the plastic side all the time, just like going out into the water. On the beaches, kind of caught in the seaweed, you'll see stuff even just floating around. You'll see fishing buoys everywhere, like
crab pots and all that.
Exactly, attached to where they should be in the water, being used, and then like halfway up a cliff, wedged in between some rocks. And it's like, why is that there? That's bonkers. And just bits of rope everywhere, and bottles and yogurt. Ridiculous. But it's not just about the garbage. Like, it's easy to kind of focus on that because it's so visible, it's so easy to see. And it's so glaringly unnatural. I say, what's this thing to do? Exactly.
This is supposed to be pink in this place.
Right. Like, whoa, it's blue. What? It's all wrong. But this is, so it's more than just the pollution. It's about climate change kind of as a whole. Because that's, I don't know, that's like the primary threat that we're facing at the moment, it seems, as far as I can tell anyway. And so, I don't know, appreciate what we have and do better.
And listen, so you think that people kind of, through following along, they can then just like make next step and kind of look at it, okay, what we can do to preserve it, or just raise awareness like, hey, this is so fragile and might be gone, right? What
I'm kind of hoping for through this is, so the social media stuff is essentially photos and videos of what I'm experiencing, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I'm hoping that people will kind of see that and go, wow, this is a pretty awesome place, and maybe just stop and think for a minute.
And even pick the piece of plastic they found while they're walking on the beach.
Exactly. Like, there's loads of initiatives going on at the moment, like I think it's 3 for the earth or something. And it's just the idea that anytime you go to the beach, you pick up 3 pieces of plastic and take it away with you. It's not hard. It's quick. It's easy. It's not even messy.
Yeah.
Like you could be getting sand in your car anyway if you're at the beach. And it makes a small impact. But if everybody does it, then it can have a bigger impact. And the same kind of goes with climate change, I'd like to think, is we as consumers drive what industry does by our buying habits. So if we support companies that are having less of a negative impact or...
Yeah. And do you have any of those companies kind of sponsoring you or kind of like a sticker saying, hey?
I've got a little bit of that going on. Origin protein bars, they have some exciting stuff. I'm not allowed to say what it is yet, but they've got exciting stuff in the pipeline. They're announcing this summer. And so they've sponsored me with their protein bars. And their whole thing is just like real food as opposed to all these scary additives you find nowadays. Just things you want to eat, like what we're supposed to eat in a protein bar.
I read somewhere that our like a grandparents would have a trouble to recognize stuff that we're buying as edible. It's
probably.
Like, are you eating this?
This is not.
This is not bacon. This is not how bacon looks like.
Exactly. Like, what are you doing to yourself? The other crowd is BoTe Sport. They are a water sports kind of manufacturing company. They're based in France. They have a worldwide presence, though. It's the same crowd that do the pens and the razors and everything. But they've started creating a whole line called BoTe Earth, and they do surfboards and stand-up paddle boards. And they are made with renewable sort of natural resources. So it still has the foam core for buoyancy, but then it's, instead of coated in plastic or resin, it's coated in paulownia wood, which is a renewable timber that creates the veneer. And then the rails are flax fiber and the deck pad is cork. And they're beautiful, like they're just aesthetically gorgeous, but they're also less harmful kind of as an impact. Because part of the problem with most industries really, but stand-up paddleboarding in this case, is the equipment is kind of awful a lot of the case. Loads of toxic resins and polystyrene and plastic and neoprene, and you can't do anything with neoprene. It just goes in a landfill. So there are people who have started kind of upcycling old wetsuits and turning them into handbags and backpacks and whatnot. And so that's cool. And so we donate our old school wetsuits to that kind of initiative. And then supporting the brands that make the boards that are trying to minimize their negative impact. So BoTe Sport is one of them. Starboard has quite a good kind of eco thing going on. Infinity. There's a few other companies, but there are people trying. And
I suppose to your point, a lot of because this is another good point, that a lot of equipment that we people who are into outdoors using is actually, like you said, kind of nasty plasticky stuff. Not long ago I had a lady on the podcast. We were talking about cycling and bicycles, and one of the thing was that cycling industry needs to kind of up their game in terms of recycling, because it's not so much, you're not gonna change the materials, like you said. You gotta have like a foam for buoyancy in the boards, and you will have a carbon fiber in the frame of the bicycle, but now what you do with that, right? How can you, just like you said, so it's not gonna end up in the landfill, but let's do something with it, either for upcycling or just have a program of actually taking that away and doing something else with that. I guess this is the trend now in the sports industry to do things like that.
I think people are starting to become aware of these issues, and that the amount of rubbish we're producing is just crazy. And producing the rubbish then those carbon footprint impacts, and then what do you do with the rubbish once it's there, and then
Oh yeah, because it's
way too much.
It's
Like-
all the transportation and everything that goes into production of it, and then moving it around
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
all that.
We'll have Wall-E world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your take on the climate change? It seems like, I follow that discussion for some time, and it seems to me like there are like two camps really. There are one camp that is labeled deniers, and there's another camp that is called alarmists, right? And I suppose and then there's everything in the middle, right? So I guess my point is like we don't have idea what to do with it. What's your take on that? Because like if you listen to if you look at the alarmist camp, then it's like, well, okay, we're done.
Right. We're just all screwed anyway, so why bother? I've been reading a book that is called The Uninhabitable Earth by a guy called David Wallace Wells, and he's been researching climate change in depth for a number of years now. I don't know exactly how long. And so what the book does is it kind of just breaks down what the scientific models say we're going to get from kind of best case scenario to worst case scenario. And the alarmists don't seem that far wrong. There's some very scary statistics in this book, and as I'm reading it, I'm like horrified and like, oh my god, but like really excited, and it's like a real page turner. I'm like, what happens next? Oh my god, we're all gonna die. Or maybe we won't, maybe we'll figure it out. I have no real solutions for what we might do, but it seems like if we want to avoid serious misery and hardship, we need to like overhaul the system and mobilize the way we did for World War II in the next decade. It seems like the next decade is like make or break, and if that doesn't create real shifts in the way the world kind of operates, it's not looking great. Like the last time the world was 4 degrees warmer than it is today, there were palm trees at the North and South Pole, and basically everything in between was desert. And then the deniers go, oh, climate change, it's not real, or if it is real, it's not caused by humans. Like, whatever. I'm no expert, like I said, but humans weren't around the last time the world was 4 degrees warmer, and it doesn't look like we'd be able to survive.
We in general just arrived. Right?
Exactly, we're so young. We're so young, and the world has been pretty stable. And yes, there are minor fluctuations here and there. You get the mini ice age, or it was a bit warmer around the Vikings, but overall, like. It's been very stable for.
I would say that given what we're doing and the kind of global impact that we're having, because we are a global species, right? There's no doubt about it.
Totally,
It's almost expected that we will affect climate in some way, right? It's almost like what do you mean we're not doing this? Like it's expected that we will have an impact on it because
there's so many of us. We've overrun the place. Like of course we're having an impact. We're having an impact on forests, and if you cut down the forest, then the carbon doesn't get absorbed as well, and there's all these like feedback loops, and it seems really obvious to me.
What's the book again?
The Uninhabitable Earth.
Okay.
Life After Warming is the kind of subtitle.
All right, great.
I can show it to you afterwards.
I'll just even for the benefit of our listeners.
It's a very interesting read. I would totally recommend it just to kind of prepare yourself. Right. And it kind of looks at the models by the end of the century, so the at the beginning of the 22nd century. That's what it would be called.
Okay.
So like by 2100.
Okay.
So that's only 80 years away. And best case scenario is 25 Holocaust worth of dead. And that's best case scenario.
Right.
And we kind of privileged people in the North and the West we'll kind of get away with it the longest because we have the money and we're in cooler parts of the world.
Yeah.
And we've got the money to bounce back from these storms that are going to start coming more regularly. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame because we're the ones that have created most of the pollution in the first place. And then it's going to be all the developing countries around the equator that get hit the hardest. And they're not going to be able to bounce back.
That's a huge argument, right? That the measures, like measures that's supposed to prevent climate change will actually kind of stop or hinder development of the development countries. They're going to be the hardest, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the arguments, like, well, great, and there's a lot of people who are just making the argument that all that, you know, climate change programs are effectively, you know, again, driven by, you know, West and privileged people,
right,
just to hinder the expansion of the developing countries who can just
totally. It's so unfair. Like global poverty is down and global hunger is down and the middle class is rising all over the world, and there's lots of good things happening right now, but all of that rise is coming from fossil fuel use. Yep. And the fossil fuel use will...
It's not a good idea to take all that carbon that's in the earth and pull it out and burn it. It's not a good idea.
And then it gets in the atmosphere, and apparently the pollution that we're getting from cities is actually helping with keeping the temperature lower. Mm-hmm. So it's bad for lung disease and for death by pollution, but it's lowering the overall temperature. So some people are like, we should just spray more pollution in the atmosphere. And it's like, no, that's not a good solution at all.
That's not a good solution. All right, listen. Let's go back to your expedition. So, but you're not doing that on the one go, right? It's like you're taking one leg at a time, depending on the weather and everything else.
Exactly. So, stand-up paddleboarding is a very weather-dependent sport because you're stood up on the board. You're a huge target for wind. Mm-hmm. So, and you only have the power of your arms basically to propel yourself. So if you're paddling into a strong headwind or crosswind, or it just gets hairy if the wind gets too strong.
Could you sit on that board and paddle?
Totally.
I know it's not stand-up paddleboard, then technically it's sit-down paddleboard.
Sit down. But the other day I was crossing from the north side of the Mizen Peninsula directly across to Castletown Bear, which is about 20 kilometers of open water. Mm-hmm. And the wind was a strong southeasterly. Strong for paddleboarding, not for sailors. It was about 15 knots, I think. Mm-hmm. So it was directly behind me. It was perfect. I lined it up. It was just like, go for it. Mm-hmm. It took about 4 hours to cross, and there wasn't any land to pull into to take a break or anything. Yeah. So after about an hour, I'd sit down for 15 minutes, have some water, sit there, kind of.
Right.
Just make sure I was pointing the right direction.
Right. How physical that is, like, compared to other. Because I suppose like a surfboarding is it the word?
Surfing. Yeah.
Surfing. I was just get confused.
All these boards. Board sports.
So I suppose surfing is like only kind of short amount of time where you're actually doing something, right? And then you're catching a wave and so on and so on. But in a stand-up paddleboarding is almost like I have a friend who his brother crossed the Baltic Ocean on the surfboard, on the windsurfing board.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Max Vujicic.
Yeah.
And so that's incredibly physical, right? Because you need to you're controlling the board. You need to kind of wrestle with the sail and all that. But it seems to me like a stand-up paddleboarding can be quite physical as well, because you first of all you're standing all the time and you're propelling yourself using power of your arms, and plus you're balancing on the board and the wind and everything else, right?
It's so sometimes. Yes, it is always a full body workout because the paddling itself is arms and core predominantly, and a good bit in your back and shoulders. And then your legs are always doing kind of micro movements to stay balanced, like you said. So in that, it does use the whole body, but it's quite low impact, I find. I'm very rarely ever sore after paddling. So one day on this adventure, I was paddling for 9 hours.
But you're a professional. You're doing that for many, many years, right?
I guess so. I think most of our customers at the business, yeah, some people probably walk away a bit like, whoa, my shoulders are sore. But, well, with the business anyway, we don't push anybody hard. We take it handy. It's kind of like going for a walk.
Yeah.
It can, though, be quite physical. Yeah. So the other day when I was crossing over...
Well, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. You were 4 hours on the damn thing.
Right. And the waves were... I had like a big enough kind of southwesterly swell coming in mixed with the wind fetch from the southeast, which created waves a couple feet tall just because it was moving over such a distance of open water. So I was getting all these weird peaks. So the water was really like, woo. So my legs were bent and actively kind of absorbing the shock. They were like the shock absorbers.
Sure.
And that definitely was, I was like, wow, that was a workout. Like I broke a sweat doing that.
Yeah.
And then using the paddle to balance as well, because it becomes like a third point of contact in the water. So you can use that to kind of brace yourself against the wave there and support yourself over here, and then paddle harder to catch the wave and go down it. And so it can be quite physical, but then you can also do it quite relaxing. I like paddleboarding because it is so versatile in that way. Like a novice can get on the first time ever, jump on, and within 10 minutes be pretty happy covering 5 to 6 kilometers in a couple hours and getting a real sense of what it's all about. But then you can also train your whole life, and people do crazy things with them. They go down like waterfalls and rapids, and they surf huge waves, and they do downwind paddleboarding. There's a race from, it's called Molokai to Oahu, and it's in between two of the Hawaiian Islands, and they just downwind. It's 50 some miles, I think, and it's just over the course of a day, and they're just like, and
you get it. So you can get in trouble easily at sea if you're not careful, right? Because is it possible that the wind and swell will be working to the, so strongly that you won't be able to paddle your way back into the land? And is that possible?
In theory, it absolutely is. Yeah.
Wow.
So what you do is, or what I'm doing to negate the chances of getting adrift in the Atlantic Ocean, is just keeping a really close eye on the conditions. So there's 4 different kind of weather forecasting apps I use, and I'm checking wind, swell, tide. Yeah, those are kind of the main ones I keep an eye on, the wind, the swell, and the tide. I don't really care if it's sunny or rainy. It's always nice when it's sunny, but that doesn't matter too much. And
do you carry with yourself like a radio or some?
So I've got a VHF radio that will connect me with the Coast Guard and any other boat around. I've got what's called a personal locator beacon that is registered to me, so I can just pull out an antenna, press a button, and the Coast Guard knows it's an emergency situation.
Sure.
And then every morning before I launch, I call the Coast Guard and I tell them where I am, where I'm going, and how long I expect it to take.
So pretty much like boating.
It's totally, same deal. And I, like the other day when I was out, the Coast Guard came on with the weather sea area forecast, that's what it's called. They were like, there is a small craft warning, blah de blah, and then they
you are pretty much small craft lady.
I'm definitely a small craft. So when I got in that day, I called the Coast Guard and I was like, I made it to land, it's all good, I'm in Castletown Bear. And the guy was like, are you going out tomorrow? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And he was like, here's what you should do. Stay in Castletown Bear for a few days, have a couple beers, enjoy yourself, get back to it later. And I was like,
right.
okay, Richard from the Coast Guard, it's a deal. So I'm here.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and how you're halfway through? How far are you already?
Not that far. I'm probably just short of about 200 kilometers. I've covered most of County Cork coastline so far. So within the next 2 days, I'll probably be in Kerry. Kerry will take about 2 weeks. And then Clare is about a week. Galway's about a week. Mayo's about a week. Sligo's half a week.
Yeah.
Leitrim's like half a day.
But it's a duration rather than the time, because you may, if you hit like a window of bad weather, then I might
be grounded. Yeah, totally. And the coastline of Clare, say for example, is totally exposed.
Yes.
So for that week, I'm gonna need to get that done in a week. It's gonna have to be a baller week.
Yeah.
And then once I get into Mayo and Galway, there's a lot more shelter from islands.
Yes.
So then it's a bit more flexible.
And is the idea that you're gonna do that one after another, or you perhaps leave Clare for later and go somewhere else and kind of stitch them together the Atlantic way?
Definitely a conversation I've had. So Ed, my partner, he's a local surfer guy. He knows Irish weather and water quite well. And he was advocating for something like that, just for kind of practicality's sake and getting it done within a reasonable time. But my background's theatre, so I was all like, but the narrative of the story. And he was just like, oh my God, Oona. But so at the moment it is just A to B and a few days off here, a few days off there, and then keep going from where I left off. I'm hoping to do it that way for the sake of the narrative. But if it just looks like it's totally unachievable,
you'll never get past Clare.
Right. I'm willing to be flexible and kind of rethink it if it looks like it'll never happen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So right now, when you think you're going to finish?
I'm hoping to be done by the end of July.
Oh.
Yeah.
So pretty good.
The plan.
That's pretty good.
It's 66 days of paddling around 30 kilometers a day. So I'm hoping that I've not covered those 30 kilometers every day, and then I've had some days off. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
We're gonna be tracking you, and we're gonna be
awesome.
Looking. So, and do you have any stuff with you on because this is one of the things on the paddleboard, and we're gonna get into paddleboarding a little bit more, I think.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else about the paddleboarding, stand-up paddleboarding, I guess, Wild Atlantic way that we haven't covered yet. Is there anything else that we should talk about?
Not really. We covered why, just appreciation. It's kind of my ode to Mother Earth, I suppose.
Oh, that's very nice. You put it nicely. That's good. And the tool of choice is a stand-up paddleboard because it's your business.
It's my business, and
you see this as also kind of like a advertisement for your business, no doubt.
Yeah, that would be a great kind of sub. Added bonus, shall we say. Right. And paddleboarding is quite new in Ireland, so I think this will be good for the sport in this country in general, just to raise awareness for what it is. Oh, no doubt.
There's a you get some good coverage of your challenge. Like this podcast, but also
definitely,
but also you met with some other people, and I read blogs about your.
Yeah, I spoke.
Is there much interest?
There seems to be some interest. There's another guy who is prone paddling, so he's lying down on a board, and he's circumnavigating Ireland, going point to point.
Wow.
And he's raising money for cancer, for the Irish Cancer Society, and fair play, Nathan, that's his name. He's a few days ahead of me, and so everybody's kind of confused. If they aren't familiar with paddleboarding and the different disciplines they're like, wait, where, who, what's going on? There's too many of you at once. It's all confusing. And it's just
Okay.
sort of weird coincidence that we actually he launched from Inchydoney and I launched from Kinsale on the same day.
Oh,
And then the other day when I was going around Mizzen, I met 3 kayakers who were paddling around Ireland to raise money for the RNLI.
right.
And so I guess it's just like,
It's a popular
a thing to do
endeavor
at
just
the
to go
moment.
around Ireland.
yeah.
So what's the next type of watercraft
Yeah,
that
exactly.
you're
What
gonna
else?
circumvent?
Well, we met a guy who was sailing around Ireland last summer in a laser. So one
Right.
of those tiny little sailboats.
Oh,
And then Nuala Moore from Dingle, the open ocean swimmer, she was involved in a swimming relay race a number of years ago, and they went around Ireland.
right.
So
Well, I
it's
suppose
a thing, I guess.
it's a thing. It's a
Yeah.
small island, so we can just go
It's
around it. And
It's
anywhere.
apparently the 8th largest island in the world.
Eighth largest. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
actually right. It's not that
And
small.
It's smaller than
I think
Madagascar
it's
and Australia and
yeah,
stuff, but-
it's small when you can drive from coast to coast in one day, but then the coastline is quite kind of rugged, and it's like
Totally.
when it comes
So
to
many
length
ins
of
and
the
outs.
coastline, I wouldn't say it's probably
It's enormous.
Yeah.
It's enormous. Like, so the guys who are going circumnavigating, they're going to cover about 1,500 kilometers
Whoa.
in their journey. I'm going in and out and following the coastline, so I'm going to cover at least 2,000, and I'm only doing half the country.
right.
And I'm not even going into all the little nooks and crannies.
And is it because this is how you decided to do, or is it because on the stand-up paddleboard you have to be very close to the shore and follow the coastline?
There's some of both, really.
Yeah. Because you can take a shortcut. It's like I'm just gonna cut it.
Jump across, exactly. Like I did the other day. So if the wind is with me, I will kind of just jump across. But honestly, those open ocean crossings, unless there's like a pod of dolphins with you, it's
They're
kind of boring.
Yeah.
It's just like cool water. And like water's amazing, but
if you're
like
like
a
5
desert.
hours on it.
right, it's just like it's flat, it's blue. Kind of like a desert,
Yeah.
but water. So it's more interesting to follow the coastline, I
Yeah.
find. And then you also get the added benefit of the shelter.
Yes.
And so
And do you see people kind of waving at you?
sometimes, yeah, mostly confused, not so much waving. It's just like,
What's
what
that?
is going on? What? Who are they? Why are there bags on the board? Because I've got bags on the board, that's rare enough. So people know I'm doing something more than just
Yeah, I was gonna
like
ask
a
about
jaunt.
that. Yeah, so you have a bags. These
Yeah.
are like bags dedicated for stand-up paddleboards, special
They're-
bags, or are you just?
They're just dry bags. I've
Okay.
got 2 60-liter dry bags
okay.
that Sola wetsuits
Right.
I got from
And it's
them.
like because I thought that obviously there will be like a shed load of like a specialized bags for stand-up, or is it just not popular enough?
There probably is. It's hard enough to get all that specialized equipment in Ireland. It all has to get brought in from the UK or France or
Yeah.
like in America, I could get anything and everything and all the most random gadgets you never
Yeah.
really needed, but now you want just because they exist. But here in Ireland, everything has to come in from
Yeah.
elsewhere. There was one company that was based in Dublin called Mara that did wetsuits, and my paddle is a Mara paddle. And they closed last year, which was kind of a shame. And they were the only actual manufacturers in Ireland that did
Wow.
any of that kind of
That's a bummer.
equiment. Yeah, which is kind of a shame.
So let's go into the stand-up paddleboard. And
Okay, the sport.
The sport. And I heard someone talking about stand-up paddleboarding that this is type of sport that if we wind back time from to the moment where to the start of civilization and let it go again, certain things would be discovered again, right? We would discover probably hunting again and bow.
Right, we have to eat.
Yeah, we would discover probably we would discover a wheel and a car again.
Yeah.
And the guy was arguing that stand-up paddleboarding is definitely not something that would be discovered again.
Discovered again.
Is there like other board sports are kind of taking shots at stand-up paddleboarders? It's like, you guys are like weird or something, making fun of you or something.
I think there is kind of an element of that. There's a fair bit of animosity in there. Paddleboarding's kind of like the new kid on the block. It didn't get popular until kind of the late 90s, just sort of in California. And then it hasn't exploded in the rest of the world until the 2000s. So it is quite a new sport in its modern form. But people have been standing on floating bits of stuff, propelling themselves with a stick forever.
Do you know, this is what I was thinking, you know, as much as that concept of winding back time and then stand-up paddleboard will never be invented again is kind of fun. This is exactly what I was thinking. Like, well, it's not that weird because you kind of, you know, like a log in the water, and you're trying to get there, and you stand up on that log, and it's just a little bit too short. So what you're gonna do? You're just gonna push yourself, you
push yourself along. There's totally historical evidence of, I don't know the history particularly well, but in South America, I think the Pacific coast of South America, they have these kind of cool reed boats, and they would stand on those and propel themselves along with a stick and fish off of it.
Yeah.
Or in Africa, along the rivers of Africa, I think there's evidence of people in kind of like, again, kind of long, narrow, floating logs.
Like you're sitting in a boat and using your oars. This is kind of like a similar thing.
Right, or you kind of
standing.
Except when you stand up, you have a much better vantage point of what's around you. So one of the causes of animosity between traditional surfing and stand-up surfing is that the stand-up paddleboarders are slightly farther out to sea because the boards are bigger, so they can catch the waves earlier, and they have a better vantage point, so they can see what's coming, so they can position themselves to be in the right place to catch all the waves. So then the surfers are annoyed because they're not catching all the waves because they can't see what's coming. And then there's exactly that goes on. Get off my wave. And the supboarders will be wave hogs and douchebags about it, and that's them being douchebags. But they just, because of that height difference, they can see what's coming better.
I was talking. I had on the podcast. Do you know Wild Adventure Way?
Caroline. Yeah. I know Caroline well.
Yeah. So I had Caroline was on the podcast as well, and we were talking about various types of surfing and stand-up paddleboarding.
Yeah.
And she said, like, well, you would like it because you can put stuff on a board, and if you like fishing, you can put your fishing gear on it, and
People do that,
and you can just reach all those, you know, like you said, nooks and crannies and places that are otherwise unreachable. You know, like a little, you know, like a cliffs or kind of like a little fjords almost like we have here
that are too small for boats.
Yeah, and you rock hopping on it, and it's really dangerous and really sketchy sometimes to walk on those because they're steep and they're sharp. Yeah, and if you fall,
especially here in Ireland.
That's it's like I had a guy on the podcast actually that podcast goes up tomorrow when we talk about rock hopping and fishing heavy ground.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's bold.
And Carol was like, well, you will like that. And I was like, yeah, actually, you can put all your those bags and reach those points.
There's a SUP manufacturing company in Florida called BoTe, BoTe, and they have quite a strong focus on SUP fishing.
Wow.
So they've created all these like attachment points on the board and these
like a rod holders
gadgets.
Wow.
There's like a cooler that you can sit on that gets strapped to the board that's specific.
Now you got my interest. Now you got my interest.
And there's this like rack thing that slots in the back with rod holders that you can slip your rods into, and then there's like a paddle.
Yeah.
All sorts of gadgets.
It's a little bit it's a little bit like a kayak fishing.
Yeah.
Kayak fishing is very popular, except I can tell you that I see, as an angler, I see advantage with standing, because when you're standing, you can cast better. You can cast further.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on the
that makes
kayak,
total
even
sense.
those fishing kayaks, there are sit on top kayaks. So in theory, you can stand on it, but it's not really designed to be standing on it.
Because they kind of, it would probably be a bit unstable.
It would
if
be
you-
unstable. It'll be unstable.
Yeah.
So I can see advantage on the stand up. Is it like SUP? Is it how it's called? SUP?
SUP, yeah.
right.
SUP. Or people refer to it as SUP.
Okay.
Or they refer to it as
yeah. But
I do stand up.
Yeah. But if I wanted to kind of sound, like I know what I'm
SUP.
talking about.
Yeah.
SUP, right?
SUP boarding.
SUP fishing.
Snap.
SUP fishing.
SUP fishing.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I start to like it already because I see that advantage over kayak fishing because you can stand and you can cast better.
Yeah.
And then you can always sit down when you're tired.
Yeah.
And you can
get
have
those
all your
choices.
stuff with you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. But
Yeah.
it's probably more prone to bad weather than the kayak, right? I presume you can tackle more swell and kind of slightly worse weather on a kayak than
I would think that would be true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're standing up, you're more of a target for wind. So as soon as you just sit down,
Yeah.
like if it gets windy, I just sit down.
Mm-hmm. Can you paddle then?
You can paddle, but you don't get quite as much like oomph
Mm-hmm.
from your strokes.
Should you have like a separate paddle just for paddling while you're sitting?
They've made this kind of like weird attachment mini paddle that you can slip on to the handle side and then paddle like
While
a
you're
kayak.
sitting? Oh.
So they've definitely approached that. I don't have one. I think it's a little gimmicky, but
Uh-huh.
I can when I'm sat down, being able
But
to
you're not
paddle
fishing.
this
You're not
way.
You're not doing SUP fishing, right?
No,
So
I'm not doing SUP
perhaps
fishing.
that's why.
I'm not much of a fisherman.
That's
I'd go
correct.
hungry if I was dependent on my fishing skills, I think.
And so what's the worst weather? What's the worst sea that you can tackle, or maybe that you already have tackled before?
The worst conditions I've been out in would be a toss-up. It was either crossing from Mizzen to Castletown Bear. As I got closer to Castletown Bear, just because the fetch from the wind
Yeah.
was traveling over 20 kilometers, it just got quite big. Or when I was going around Gallyhead, farther east in Cork, there was an easterly wind coming essentially all the way from the UK.
Wow.
Just so the wind was traveling across quite a large expanse, and it was creating waves that were about probably 4 feet high.
Wow.
And that was pretty rough. But it was still sunny and the wind was still behind me, so
Right.
it was okay.
So there was no danger that.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I was in danger. The south coast of Ireland, by all accounts, is the easiest part of this journey.
Yeah.
So as I start going north, Sleigh Head at the end of the Dingle Peninsula, those waters can be very treacherous.
Oh, really?
You just, that sound in between the Blaskets and Sleigh Head, you have to catch at the right tide or you'll be going backwards. And if the wind is wrong, then you can just go out into the open ocean.
Yeah.
Or some of the waters, some of the headlands up around Donegal. Or,
Yeah, I was gonna say Donegal will be a challenge.
Yeah, so there's definitely potential to be out in hairier weather, but I'm hoping to avoid it. Just
How much of the knowledge like a sailing knowledge you have? Because this is like, to me, this is the biggest difference between surfing and SUP, right? That because surfing has this kind of local nature. I go on the beach as waves, and I'm just going in and out on the beach, and
you're in the one spot.
Well, what you're doing is like you're actually out there. You're traveling at the sea, so you're taking into consideration wind and the direction of swells and whether wind is against the swell or not, and all that. Do you have any like a formal preparation, or do you just learn all that as you go along?
There's an element of just kind of learning as I go. I'm from the desert originally. Like, water is relatively new to me. I always loved the ocean, but like I certainly didn't grow up near it. I didn't grow up in it. I don't know anything about sailing. The whole like navigation thing and
But you know
Admiralty
everything about the wind
charts and-
direction and how wind works with the tide. That you know.
I've learned that just in the last few years since setting up Wild SUP Tours.
Okay.
And by the end of this journey, I'm going to be a lot better at it than I am now.
So you're learning as you go.
I'm learning as I go, and I'm talking to local people as I go. So the first night I stayed with a local surfer, and then I stayed with a local open ocean swimmer, and then the last guy I stayed with was in the Coast Guard in Skull, and he pulled out his navigation charts and all the gadgets, and I got some really great kind of local knowledge about the water in those areas from the people I was staying with.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to keep doing that as I go along, just stopping in, talking to fishermen, talking to other water
Sailors
sports
and so
people,
on.
sailors, exactly. And just getting a sense of what the potential hazards are and then
What to
knowing
look
how
for.
to avoid
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, so if someone listens to that podcast and he goes like, he or she goes like, "Whoa, I would like to really start and try to do that." So, what's the starting point
For trying stand-up paddleboarding.
Yeah.
I would say it's always good to try it if you can. But don't just rent a board. Go take a lesson from someone or take a tour or something.
So it's not a matter of just go to the sporting goods shop, buy a stand-up paddleboard and then paddle and just off you go.
There's so much discrepancy in the quality of the board, and you can get inflatable boards now that are really very cheap, and it seems like a great deal.
Board.
They're inflatable.
That doesn't sound right.
They roll up, they fit in a backpack, you can throw them in the back of your car. It's
Are they rigid
super
enough?
handy. Well, that's the thing. You inflate them to
It's like it sounds like a
16
mattress. Like
It's yeah, totally like those things you float around. in a
yeah,
swimming pool.
exactly.
They're a bit better than that, but you inflate them to about 16 to 18 psi. So they're quite they're hard, and they're made out of I don't know what kind of rubber it is, but it's sturdy. It's like way sturdier than just an inflatable mattress. But they're still kind of bouncy, so you don't get that forward glide as nicely. And the higher end brands are coming up with all sorts of innovative ways to try and create the rigidity of a solid board.
Yeah.
So Red Paddle Co. and Starboard and some of the others, they've done like these things you slot in the sides, or these tension wires, or various different things to help with rigidity. And they are okay. Like those high-end inflatable boards are pretty good.
How they're different from, let's say, windsurfing boards? Because I would thought that, windsurfing guys, they already figured it out.
Right.
Or are there any special things that are different in the stand-up paddleboard that they cannot just take all the technology from the windsurfing board? Like, oh, there you go.
And
is it in specificity?
Well, the biggest stand-up paddleboard companies, manufacturers, are old windsurf companies. So Nash and Starboard are kind of like the two global leaders, and they are both originally windsurf companies.
Yes.
So they have taken a lot of that windsurf knowledge with them. The board shapes have started to change. So like a SUP surfer essentially looks like a short board. It's just bigger.
Okay.
So it's wider, it's longer, and it's thicker.
Okay.
The race boards kind of take off something more like a kayak, where they're long and skinny and you get lots of volume in the nose. There's two different kind of noses you can get in a stand-up paddleboard.
Right.
Either the rocker, like a surfboard, where it kind of curves up, and that's good for waves.
Yes.
Or you can get what's called a displacement hull, which is kind of a pointy nose, more like a boat. And that is used in flat water, it's used in downwind, it's used in races, and that cuts through the water a lot quicker.
Yes.
But once you start to get any waves,
Yes.
the nose just kind of like plows through the waves instead of going over them.
Yeah. So what's the biggest difference between windsurfing board and SUP board? Like one biggest difference, is it size?
Yeah, size, I guess the biggest difference. I don't know, the shape. I'm not super familiar. Like, I've never windsurfed myself. But the windsurf boards I've seen, they just look kind of retro. And the paddleboards look more contemporary.
Now there is a lot of windsurfing guys very upset listening to that podcast.
I'm not a windsurfer, so I don't really know anything about it.
You guys are using retro boards.
Retro boards. The ones I've seen, they kind of have like, they're flat on the bottom, and then the rails on the bottom are very sharp, and then they kind of curve, and there's almost like a half moon deck with like a flat area that you stand in. I don't know if that's all windsurf boards or just the few that I've actually seen.
Yes.
But the stand-up boards, you'll get the flat bottom, and then you'll get a flatter, wider deck for stability. And
yes,
then,
because you're stay.
Exactly. Yeah. So if there's more volume in the rails, the board is more stable. So some race boards, you'll actually see the deck where you stand is like sunken down, and there's like 6 to 8 inches of rail on either side of you, and you're kind of standing in like a little hollow almost. Wow. So I guess part of it would be where the volume is on the board. So on a SUP board, you'll get the volume right out to the rails, and then it's kind of curved. And on the windsurf boards that I personally have seen, the volume seems to be carried down the middle more.
Right. It's probably also because you have a sail that is attached there as well.
Right. And with windsurfing, you're sometimes actually on waves, or even if you're doing flat water, just traveling kind of stuff, you still have the wind and the sail, and the speed of it helps you with balance.
Yes. Oh, yes, because speed is totally different.
Like a bicycle, the more speed you have, the more stable it is.
Gotcha.
Kind of.
Okay, so as usual in these types of things, just don't go and buy something that salesmen try to sell.
Do some research first. And unfortunately, paddleboards are quite expensive. Like a good paddleboard, you're easily looking to pay at least $1,000, if not more. But you can get secondhand ones. There are some good kind of secondhand Facebook groups, or in the States.
Because there's surely plenty of people who have like 25 of those boards. It's like, well, actually, I don't need,
need all
15 of them.
Right. And so people move on, or maybe just they've changed size, gotten bigger, gotten smaller, whatever, they need a different board, or they've just gotten better, they want a different board, or they just get sick of it and they want to try something new. But they're still perfectly good boards. So starting out on something secondhand that's still of a good quality would be better than going to Little and buying
probably
the
the best start is to contact you and just
obviously
get a tour and see how it goes
and see how it goes. And if not us, somebody who kind of knows, do your research, because the ocean is boss. Like, don't mess with the ocean. It can go wrong fast if you don't know what you're doing.
Yes.
And so
that's
being new to it. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm doing the research. Basically,
that's a good point. That like pretty much like with a boat, right? You're less likely to harm yourself when you're on a surfing board or bodyboard or a mattress or a kayak than when you get onto a motorboat or on a sailboat, right? You more likely go further. And when you go and get into trouble, you being
can get
further,
into worse trouble. Yeah. Exactly.
But the good thing about stand-up paddleboard is that you can, like you said, you can try it even on the lake.
Exactly.
You don't need
wind.
Anywhere. You don't need you just need a little bit of water.
And it doesn't even need to be deep, because the fins are about not like the fins on our boards are 9 inches, so you only need 10 inches of water, and you can be paddling.
Right.
So you can, lakes, rivers, ocean.
And is it
Anywhere.
did it grow? You mentioned there's a race. I was asking kind of on the sporting aspect of it. So there are mainly races on.
So they do world championships every year.
Wow.
And the 2 kind of disciplines they focus on with those are races, so flat water speed, and surfing.
Right.
And then it's like the World Surf League, kind of, who surfs the best, but you're stand-up surfing instead of prone surfing.
Right.
And then there's races all up and down. They do races everywhere. They do a race kind of across London, down the Thames.
Oh.
They do a race in the Seine in France. There's the downwind race in Hawaii. The kind of unofficial world championships are the Pacific Paddle Games at Dana Point in California.
Whoa.
That's like stand-up paddle mecca. I guess that's where it really exploded and kind of took off from there. Last year the world championships were in Denmark though. They did the races in Copenhagen, and then I think they call it cold water Hawaii or something, or northern Oahu or something like that. There's apparently good waves in Denmark.
Right. So would you say that the sport is on the rise right now? Is it getting more and more popular?
It was exploding in popularity over the last few years. It was the fastest growing water sport in the world for a few years. It's started to level off now though. The industry's there were loads of kind of manufacturing companies that were just popping up all over the place, and now they're starting to level off. It's starting to level off a bit, and you're starting to get the really good ones that are sticking around. But in Ireland, I think it's still growing in Ireland because I'd say within the last 10 years here is really all it's.
Yeah. Well, I'm living in near the coast, and while I was in the holidays in Spain, I saw more stand-up paddleboarders than in Ireland in the last 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's really new to Kerry. So when we set up this is our 4th year. So when we set up in 2016, you could rent a paddleboard in the Maharees. And that was about it. But there was no kind of focus on it. Right. Since we've set up, another company in Dingle set up around the same time. There's a company now in Waterville that set up last year. And now there's a company in Kenmare that set up last year also with stand-up boards. So it's really just been in the last few years in Kerry.
Well. Right.
It's been around a little longer up in Sligo, just because the whole surf thing. And then in Dublin, it's got kind of a strong enough. They do races and stuff in Dublin.
Yeah, probably more because of the kind of concentration of around Dublin City, and there's more shops and more opportunities to sell stuff and buy stuff, and probably that was what was just driving that more than anything else. And number of people,
totally,
Listen, so what's next for you?
So, next is paddling through Jersey Sound. I'm hoping to do that Thursday or Friday. Is the plan. It looks like I'll have the right conditions for it. And then continue working my way north and paddle this challenge. And then get back to work so my business partner can not be quite as annoyed at me for ditching him all summer.
But I think it's well worthy. I think it's worthwhile because, like you said, it's an adventure for you, no doubt. But then, raising awareness and I think you have a quite powerful message and quite important one for people to, I think that these days is like any type of activity or anything that can focus people on a little bit, start thinking about the outdoors and start thinking about the environment and like, hey, we actually should protect that. That's a big thing in a podcast where I also, what you said, it quite resonated with me. Is like, if you like something, if you get into fishing and you love fishing, you start caring about the fish, right?
Yeah.
What can I do
Yeah.
so this fish is there, right? Hey, well, we
Right.
need to protect rivers, we need to protect lakes, we need to protect.
Right, overfishing. If you overfish, then there's no fish just left.
Exactly,
and then you can't fish anymore.
Exactly, and I think that goes with every single kind of outdoor activity. Once you're in it, you try to protect it, and if it's outdoors, then you're protecting the outdoors, which is nature.
And everyone I've spoken to, like yourself and the people I was staying with so far along this journey, anyone who spends any time outside is already kind of aware of this conversation and this need for change, which is great, which is really wonderful. And a lot of the people I've spoken to, they really want to do change and they're not quite sure how, but they're really open and game and willing, and
but like you said,
ideas,
little things, I think that the more people start paying attention to plastic wrappers, and the simple things, like, the more they start choosing products that are not wrapped in plastic. And that's gonna follow, because there's like, management of the shops is like, well, you know what? We sell more stuff that is not wrapped in plastic. Let's
just get more of
that.
And it's starting to work totally. Like with Lidl even. I think it was just last year they started to have fruit and vegetables in the shops that wasn't pre-bagged in bags of plastic, and it's like it's a banana, like it already has a wrapping on it, it's perfectly hygienic. I don't need it in another wrapping.
It's crazy because you're buying like a potatoes, and those potatoes are not only in a kind of like a plastic basket, the whole plastic basket is wrapped again in these are damn potatoes.
It's fine. I'll wash it. I'll peel it. Whatever. Like, I can handle it. But then the other side, that's the kind of obvious plastic we don't need. But the refill shop thing, that's getting more popular in Ireland. One just opened in Ballinspettle in Cork. I spent a day there waiting for weather, so I was exploring. And there's a shop there, Leafling Mercantile, I think it was called. And that's a great way to buy flour and rice and kind of those basics, and you just bring in, for me it's really easy to get caught in, I want like a kitchen full of those like nice Kilner like snap lid jars, it's beautiful and well displayed, but like you could go in with an old yogurt container and just like put rice in it and it's fine. And then at least you're reusing the plastic that was already produced. Or I started making my own toothpaste recently.
Tell us about that, because I saw your Instagram story. I saw your toothbrush, which is bamboo, I think.
It's bamboo. So the bristles are plastic, but they're recyclable. So after the toothbrush has run its course, you take the bristles out, put them in the recycling, and the handle is compostable. So you can just throw it in the brown bin if you have a brown bin. Or if you just put it in the landfill, at least it's not going to end up killing a tortoise or something. The toothpaste thing came about. I wanted to try and do this whole journey zero waste. So I started doing some actual research into how to go zero waste. And it's totally doable, but it's quite hard. And so I am sorry to say that my journey is not 100% zero waste. I've definitely produced some, but I'm minimizing it anyway. So the toothpaste thing then also came about because I was looking at all the scary stuff that's in. I've always been dubious of fluoride. Like the research behind fluoride and cavities is so lame at best that I was like,
is Ireland still fluoriding water?
That's what I hear.
Yeah, it's one of the last countries in the world that
it's not a thing. There's like no science behind this, guys. What? Why? So I just figured I'd give it a go, and it's kind of nice. So I'm still working through the first batch, so I'm gonna try it again. You can experiment with it a bit, but it's the recipe. I just googled the recipe, and there's loads of different ones you can get, but what I did was a bit of magnesium powder because minerals are good, baking soda because is like the best cleaner in the world. Baking soda and white vinegar and some warm water, and you basically don't need anything else. Bentonite clay, because it absorbs toxins and stuff, or something like that. I don't know. It
kills the bacteria.
It's cool. It's cool stuff. Coconut oil, just because it's a thing. A bit of water. I put a little salt in it. I use Himalayan salt because
it's the best one.
Because it's the best salt. Because sea salt, which still has the trace minerals, also has loads of plastic in it. Surprise, surprise. Like 16 out of 17 sea salts tested are positive for plastic. So then you're just eating plastic. Gross. So anyway, I go with the Himalayan salt because there's no plastic in it, because there was no plastic back then. And the trace minerals. And then a little bit of peppermint oil, just because minty freshness.
Right.
And then just mix it up, and I have it in a little glass jar. And
toothbrush.
So far it works.
Right.
I mean,
Great.
I guess we'll see in a few years' time if I have loads of cavities. But
I'm sure if ever it's not because of that toothpaste.
It's probably all the, I don't know, Haribo I was eating or something else.
Listen, Oona, so just to wrap this up, tell us how people can get in touch with you, how they can get in touch with your, business to, go on a SUP tour, and how to follow you on your journey around the Wild Atlantic Way.
Cool. So Instagram is probably my strongest platform, and the handle is @OonaGoesWild, and Oona is OONA. I'm also on Twitter. I've just absconded the business Twitter account, which is @Wild SUP Tours, SUP. And then doing some on Facebook, same @Wild SUP Tours, or my own Facebook account. And then my kind of like expedition webpage, so to say, is on the Wild SUP Tours website. And that's wildsuptours.com/Oona Goes Wild. And on the webpage, there's like a live tracker, and you can see where I am. In every 15 minutes, it updates my location while I'm on the water. Okay. So I turn it off when
updates your location right now.
Exactly. I've turned it off for now. Nobody needs to see me sit in my house.
You need to remember to turn it off. Oh, damn it. I forgot.
I did that. It was one of the first days. It was the first long day of paddling. I got in, and one of the local surfers in West Cork came to meet me at this random spot. He picked me up. He had a roof rack on his board. He drove me back to his house in Clonakilty. And my sister-in-law saw on the web tracker that I was like all of a sudden zooming towards Clonakilty. And she called Ed up and was like, "Is she okay? Is she going to casualty? Like, what's wrong?"
Oh, Jesus. So, she's still like, "Oh, something bad happened."
Oh, no. But it was okay. It was Anders being a champion. So, yeah, I turn it off. Or I try and remember when I'm off the water, turn it off. But, yeah, when I'm on the water, you can track my...
It's great.
And then I'm blogging about it also. And that's the news section on the Wild SUP Tours webpage. Okay. So wildsuptours.com is a good place to kind of start.
There's a start and take it from there.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you very much.